All right, everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive? Today we're tackling a really wild what if. A world without gravity. Yeah, you heard that right. No gravity.
It sounds like a sci-fi movie, right? But stick with us because the source material we're looking at goes deep on how this would affect, like, everything.
It's not just like floating around and bumping into stuff, though, right? I mean, the thought experiment gets into some seriously big implications.
Exactly. Yeah, we're talking about like how daily life would be upended
Mm.
and how human evolution might be totally redirected, global politics reshaped.
Oh, yeah, the politics. Imagine trying to draw borders when countries are literally drifting apart. Okay, so to ground this a bit, what's our main source for this deep dive? What kind of analysis are we working with?
It's a pretty detailed report, actually. It lays out a bunch of scenarios based on the laws of physics and how different systems, biological, social, political, would adapt to zero G.
So it's not just like, hey, wouldn't it be funny if they put some real thought into this?
Yeah, that's what makes it so fascinating, right? It takes this really out there concept and tries to approach it, logically.
Awesome. So less space magic, more space logic. All right, let's get into it. The first thing jumps out at me is like daily life would be pure chaos. No gravity means no walking. It means everything is constantly floating.
Yeah, the source paints a pretty vivid picture of that. Like, imagine trying to cook dinner and your utensils are drifting away.
Or getting dressed in the morning and your clothes are like orbiting your body.
Aha, exactly. They actually talk about special clothing you'd need, like clothes with anchors and maybe even magnetic systems to keep things in place.
So like magnetic socks. I can get behind that. But seriously, how would we even move around?
Well, that's a big one. The report talks about personal propulsion systems, kind of like little jetpacks, I guess, and specially designed environments with handholds and things to push off from.
Oh, okay. So it's less effortlessly gliding and more carefully propelling yourself.
Right. And think about like the psychological impact of that. We're so used to, feeling gravity, feeling grounded. What happens to our sense of balance when that's gone?
Oh, yeah. Not just physically either. I mean, our whole sense of up and down, of stability is kind of out the window.
Exactly. And the report digs into that. It talks about how our inner ear, which helps with balance, is totally reliant on gravity. So we'd have to like relearn how to orient ourselves in 3 dimensions.
It'd be like those astronaut training videos, but like all the time.
Yeah, but even more extreme, right? Because they're still in a contained environment. Imagine trying to navigate a city where buildings are floating around, constantly shifting.
My head is already spinning just thinking about it.
It makes you realize how much we take gravity for granted, doesn't it?
Totally. And that's just scratching the surface of daily life. What about like relationships? How would physical touch and intimacy work when a simple hug could send you, flying across the room?
Right. I mean, imagine trying to kiss someone or even just hold hands.
It'd be like a constant game of zero gravity tag.
Haha, yeah. The report actually talks about how personal space would have to be redefined in this kind of world and the challenges of, developing new ways to connect physically with each other.
Wow, so even basic human interaction gets turned upside down, literally. Okay, so daily life is already a mind bender. But what about the bigger picture? How would governments function in a world without gravity?
Well, according to the report, they'd have to pretty much start from scratch. Our current legal systems are built around concepts like territory, borders, ownership of land.
Yeah, all those things kind of go out the window when everything is floating around.
Exactly. They talk about the need for new laws to govern things like personal airspace. Think of it like owning a chunk of the sky.
So instead of zoning laws, we'd have like floating zone permits.
Haha, something like that. And then there's the whole issue of preventing collisions. Imagine like a floating house drifting into a floating shopping mall.
Or a whole city just bumping into another city. Chaos.
Yeah. They actually draw some interesting comparisons to maritime law. How rules were developed to manage ships on the open sea.
That makes sense. The ocean is kind of like a two-dimensional version of a gravity-free world.
Right. So we might see a similar evolution of law, but this time it's for the open sky.
That's a really fascinating parallel. I'm curious, did they talk about how this might affect international relations? Like, would countries be more or less likely to cooperate in a world without gravity?
It's interesting. The report suggests that it could actually lead to more global unity. After all, borders become a lot less relevant when everyone is literally floating around.
It's like gravity itself has been a force keeping us apart. And without it, we might finally see ourselves as a truly interconnected species.
Yeah, and facing these shared challenges of adapting to a zero-G world could force countries to work together in ways they never have before.
That's a really optimistic take and kind of mind-blowing. Okay, but let's zoom out even further. What about the impact on life on Earth itself? I mean, would plants and animals even be able to survive in a gravity-free environment?
Well, get ready for some seriously trippy nature documentaries. The report talks about floating forests, where trees would evolve to have like root systems that spread out in all directions, not just down.
So like trees with branches and roots all mixed up, just floating around. That's kind of wild.
Yeah, and animals would have to adapt too. Imagine creatures that glide through the air or have developed new ways to cling to these floating habitats.
It's like evolution would be put on the fast forward, right? What kind of biological adaptations did they highlight as being particularly likely or interesting?
They actually compare it to extremophiles, those organisms that live in like the deepest parts of the ocean or in super hot volcanic vents.
Oh yeah, those crazy critters that can survive like anything.
Yeah, exactly. So they're saying that life in a gravity-free world would kind of be like that. Like it would find a way to adapt and thrive no matter how weird the conditions are.
That's pretty amazing. But let's bring it back to us humans for a sec.
Mm-hmm.
How would our bodies, our minds, even our societies evolve over generations in this weightless world?
Ooh, now that's where things get really, really interesting. The report talks about humans potentially evolving to have like longer limbs, later skeletons, because we wouldn't need to support our weight against gravity anymore.
They'd be like tall and slender space humans.
Yeah, kind of. And maybe we'd even develop like entirely new senses, to help us navigate a three-dimensional world where up and down don't really mean anything anymore.
Whoa, new senses? Like what? Did they give any examples?
They don't get into like specific sensory organs or anything, but they talk about how our understanding of spatial awareness, of proprioception, like knowing where your body is in space would have to change drastically.
So like we might be able to sense like air currents or maybe even magnetic fields.
Yeah, maybe it's all about adapting to this completely new way of experiencing the world.
It's like our brains would need a major software update to handle all of this. But beyond just our biology, I'm curious about the technological adaptations that might emerge. Like would we be zipping around with personal jetpacks all the time, or would we come up with something completely different?
They touch on this idea of cultural and biological fusion, like maybe we develop exosuits that would enhance our mobility in zero-G, or even like genetic modifications to optimize our bodies for a weightless existence.
Whoa, genetic mods. That's getting into some pretty ethically tricky territory, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. But it's a possibility they raise in the report.
Okay, well let's stick with the societal stuff for now. For example, what about education? Like would we still have traditional classrooms, or would learning take on a whole new form in a world without gravity?
They actually talk about floating learning pods. Like imagine these spherical classrooms that could move around and dock with each other.
So no more rows of desks and chalkboards. We'd be learning in these cool like space bubbles.
Yeah, exactly. And they suggest that it would lead to a much more dynamic and interactive learning environment.
But with all that freedom of movement, wouldn't it be like super hard to keep everyone focused? Did they address that at all?
They do acknowledge the potential for distraction, but they also highlight the amazing possibilities for hands-on learning. Like imagine studying physics in a truly weightless environment.
Oh wow, yeah. Or doing like virtual reality dissections of the human body. That'd be amazing.
Yeah. So it'd be a trade-off, right? More potential for distraction, but also more potential for for truly immersive, engaging learning experiences.
Okay, that makes sense. But speaking of the human body, what about healthcare? Like, would our bodies be more or less susceptible to certain illnesses or injuries in a world without gravity?
Well, one thing they point out is that our skeletal and muscular systems, which, evolved to work against gravity, would likely undergo some pretty big changes.
Oh yeah, because we wouldn't be like constantly fighting against that downward pull anymore.
Right. And that could lead to new health concerns like muscle atrophy or bone density loss.
So we'd have to like invent new ways to exercise and stay healthy in zero G.
Exactly. And healthcare practices would have to adapt as well.
It's like every aspect of our lives would need a serious rethink. What about our digital world? Like how would social media and the internet evolve in a gravity-free society?
Well, physical location would become a lot less relevant, right? Because everyone is constantly floating around. So they suggest that virtual reality and augmented reality would become even more integrated into our lives.
So like instead of meeting up in person, we just hang out in VR or AR.
Yeah, pretty much. They talk about virtual workspaces, floating conferences, all kinds of ways that we could connect and interact without having to be in the same physical space.
That's pretty wild. It's almost like the internet would become an extension of our physical reality.
Exactly. And they also talk about how it could change the way we work. Like imagine collaborating with colleagues from all over the world in a shared virtual environment while you're both just floating around in your own homes.
That's mind-blowing. Seems like work-life balance would take on a whole new meaning when the lines between our physical and digital worlds become so blurred.
But stepping back from the individual level, how would a lack of gravity impact? Like global trade and transportation.
Well, forget about ships and trucks and trains. The report envisions aerial carriers, like giant airships navigating three-dimensional trade routes.
So instead of traffic jams on the highway, we'd have like skyway traffic jams.
Maybe. And warehousing would be totally different too. They talk about tethered storage facilities or even orbiting depots. Orbiting depots, like giant space warehouses, that's next level. It seems like this shift would not only change how we move goods, but also potentially impact our global culture. Did they touch on any of those kinds of implications?
They suggest that as physical borders become less relevant and people are constantly moving and interacting in this three-dimensional space, we might see a shift towards a greater sense of global unity, a shared human identity.
It's fascinating to think about how this radical change to our physical reality could actually reshape our social structures and our cultural understanding. But let's not forget about one of the most basic needs. How would we feed ourselves in a world without gravity?
Yeah, good question. Traditional agriculture would definitely need a major overhaul. The report talks about the rise of hydroponics and aeroponics, like floating farms where plants are suspended in nutrient-rich solutions and their roots can grow in any direction.
Floating farms. That sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie. Did they get into any specific examples of how these floating farms might function or what types of crops might be best suited for this kind of cultivation?
They don't get into specific crop types, but they emphasize the adaptability of plant life. Like they talk about utilizing artificial light sources to mimic sunlight and carefully controlled environments to optimize growth, even without the traditional constraints of gravity and soil.
It's incredible to think about how inventive we need to be to sustain ourselves in this new reality. And what about livestock? Would we be raising animals in zero gravity, or would we see a shift towards alternative protein sources? We've been like bouncing all these crazy ideas around floating farms, spacesuits, VR hangouts. It's wild. But I gotta know, did the report say anything about livestock, like space cows, zero-G chickens?
Well, they do mention the possibility of specially designed habitats for livestock, like carefully controlled environments to keep them, healthy and producing in a weightless world.
So like anti-gravity barns. That's a visual. But they also brought up lab-grown meat, right? As a maybe more efficient maybe even more ethical solution.
Right, exactly. It's like, why bother with the hassle of raising animals in zero G when you could just, grow the meat you need in a lab?
Lab-grown space steaks. I'd try it. But beyond the whole food thing, I keep thinking about how not having gravity would like change our whole understanding of ourselves, like our place in the universe.
Mhm.
Did they get into any of that like philosophical stuff?
Yeah, they touch on it. They talk about how a world without gravity would challenge our ideas of groundedness,
Yeah.
stability, like even our perception of reality.
It's heavy stuff, man. No pun intended. Like we've built entire civilizations around the concept of gravity. How would we even begin to reframe our philosophies, our
Yeah.
religions, our art in a world where that constant force is just gone?
Right. It's profound. They explore this idea that maybe we develop a more fluid worldview, embracing change and interconnectedness. Like those would become our new fundamental principle.
It's like we'd have to redefine what it means to be human in this new reality.
Exactly.
This whole deep dive has been like a total mind trip.
Right.
But in a good way. It's shown how adaptable life is and how we humans are pretty good at problem solving, even when faced with the most insane challenges.
Totally. I mean, if we can figure out how to thrive in a world without gravity, imagine what else we're capable of.
It's a reminder that we can do like way more than we think we can. So to everyone listening, keep this thought experiment going. What would your life be like in a world without gravity? What would you do? What would you create?
Let your imagination run wild, because
Yeah.
sometimes the craziest ideas can lead to the most amazing discoveries.
That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time for another exploration of something awesome and mind-blowing.